Hey allemaal en welkom in een nieuwe aflevering van Techmag. Ik ben Magali en iedere week praat ik met een ondernemer of een expert over verschillende onderwerpen. Nu vooral het coronavirus en de meeste interviews vinden ook via Zoom plaats. Zo ook mijn interview met Nell Watson, futuriste, die speciaal voor mij de tijd maakte om te babbelen over haar bijdrage in deze tijd. I hope you enjoy. Hi Nell, thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much indeed for inviting me to your show.
So, how is this crisis impacting your life, your professional life, to be more specific?
Well, I'm having to change gears in terms of doing a lot more kind of virtual online engagements, of course, with less travel. I've been quite used to traveling great distances to Asia, to South America, etc. To be honest, it's quite welcome. I've been enjoying having a little more free time, a little more time with family, more time to relax and to write and things like that than I normally do. So on balance, it's, every cloud has a silver lining.
Yeah, right. So, and especially right now, it's important to stay optimistic, obviously. But I also read that you, and I'm going to read this, you serve on the coronavirus task force at the American Association for Precision Medicine.
Is
that correct? So tell me about your role. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. So I've been doing some work with the American Association for Precision Medicine on their coronavirus task force to help to collect useful information that is actionable, that people can actually use, whether that's members of the public or whether that is people working in the healthcare sector and dealing with immense supply chain issues of all kinds of stuff, particularly, of course, personal protective equipment. But increasingly, we're now starting to see supply chain pinches in areas such as food as well, and other kinds of resources. Now we have opportunities to do more with less, to extend resources that we have in new ways. And so I've been collecting some of the best ideas out there and trying to put them in a form that people can understand, whether that's through videos a little bit like this or through collecting what I call info decks. So
yes, yeah, I've seen some of those on your website.
Yeah, so putting it all in a nice kind of visual format that people can digest easily and quickly, and just trying to proliferate important information because there's so much info out there.
Right.
And yet, unfortunately, we live in a world where sometimes the best source of information might potentially be found on Reddit. That, it might potentially be more trustworthy and more reliable than some government sources at times, which is remarkable and scary.
Is that what you're trying to change in particular, like making the right information putting the right information in the right place and making it more accessible for everyone?
I think so, yes. Forewarned is forearmed, and if people understand better this crazy situation and just practical tips that they can use to help to manage that, then all things being equal, people will be healthier and might even be a few lives saved. And so to me that seems like a high value intervention to try to work on.
Absolutely.
And try and help the world a little bit during these tricky times.
What do you believe is the most important piece of information that you try to communicate but is still missing in the media at this moment?
I think that there is a real it's starting to come through, but there's been a lot of confusion about a lot of different areas, and one of those is the wearing of masks. And myself and some friends and colleagues have looked at this issue quite exhaustively, and it does seem as if wearing some kind of covering over one's own mouth definitely protects others, as well as protecting oneself to some degree. But it's like even a very basic cloth mask that you might make at home if that gives you a sort of protection of, let's say, 3 out of 10, in terms of breathing things in, it still gives maybe a protection of like 7 or 8 out of 10 for actually infecting others. And so if all of us wear some kind of face mask, kind of covering over our mouth and nose when we go outside, all of us as a population will be protected, and that will drop the transmission rate massively. And to me, that's one of the best ways that we can help to restore something like normality, a new normality, to this situation. And we've seen countries like Czech Republic, where they have had these grassroots bottom-up movements to create masks. So basically getting the old sewing machine out of the closet and making masks, and then they put them on what's called these mask trees. So everybody makes enough for themselves or their family, and then they make a few extra. And so that means that everyone has access to these, and also that nobody has any excuse to not wear one. And the jury's still out. Of course, we're still looking at statistics, but it does seem that there's a strong correlation between mask wearing countries and reduced transmission. And unfortunately, some of the most trusted informational organizations in the world, they seem to have a different opinion. They seem to think that masks aren't terribly helpful. And some of them are now changing their mind now that, they're taking a second look, which I think is very helpful.
So mission accomplished.
Well, getting there. I'd still like to see some of that info proliferate.
Right. So what strikes me the most is that I know you because of your passion, because you're passionate about technology and futuristic stuff. But right now you're right in the middle of the medical matters of COVID-19. I'm wondering, are you planning on, or are you thinking of trying to find ways to use technology, to combine the technology and those masks, or just prevention from COVID altogether, or how do you see this?
Interesting. Well, I do think that there are opportunities to make some revolutionary new kinds of masks. We've seen some experiments with things like HEPA filters. So, these kinds of air filtration filters, which are very, very tightly bonded. Those seem to be very effective, actually, as a material for making masks out of. And the nice thing about that is that they appear to be quite easily reusable. So if we could make a cheap mask that cost just a few euro, but you could reuse it very easily, that would be very helpful. Now, of course, there are these P100 or N100 masks, which are the big ones that usually have a face shield, or they have like two or sometimes one kind of big kind of can thing sticking out of it. Now, those are also reusable many times, but they're big, bulky, and not very fun to wear in the summer. So if we could make a lightweight mask that was easily reusable, that would be great. Now, it does seem possible to reuse, or to say recycle, shall we say, or refurbish, perhaps might be a better word, some of the N95 masks. I've done some experiments myself with putting them in a Ziploc bag and then bringing them up to a temperature in a pot of about 80 degrees C, and then leaving them there for about an hour. And that, as far as I can tell, that doesn't seem to damage them. And several different studies confirm that as well. So sometimes trying to put something in an oven to just that temperature can be tricky, but I found it's much easier to watch a pot instead, and to sort of stick a thermometer in there and know what temperature that really is. So that works for me.
Well, I think it's really admirable that you're doing this, because I'm also wondering, right now in Belgium, there's conversations about this first company producing masks. But how can we find like an actual balance between, making money as a company and helping society? Because I feel like it's a little bit more frowned upon, maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of discussion online. I saw recently there was an ice cream parlor in the Netherlands which had started selling masks because ice cream wasn't doing so well in these times. And, they were selling FFP2 N95 type masks for €9 each, or a box of 3 for 25. And that led to quite a discussion online. Some people seem to think that, that's fair enough. They're providing a useful service, potentially saving people's lives. And, a lot of people are quite prepared to pay that money if they have it to help protect their health. A few other people found it a little bit mercenary and thought maybe that was a little bit potentially price gouging. But I think, the best way to bring prices down is for more people to think, oh, that's a good idea, and start selling masks. And we live in a world often now where regulations can prevent or frustrate a restaurant turning into a grocery store for the duration of this crisis, which is really unfortunate because they're sitting on tons of food that they can't use. And people want to buy it, but regulations frustrate that, Similarly with farming, often farmers are obliged to create purely for export or purely for sale to the commercial or restaurant markets, who obviously aren't buying much at the moment. And so in some places, farmers are literally pouring milk out onto the down the drain, or leaving food in the field unpicked because they can't get the labor. And so I think
it's a matter of being creative.
It's a matter of being creative, yes, and also making some temporary exceptions to help, create get-arounds or workarounds for some of these situations, because some of the regulations that we have are designed for a different world than we have at the moment.
Yes, that's a very good point. And what other regulations are you thinking about?
Well, I think primarily things related to selling or creation of gray markets or reselling of goods, or, what vendor can sell what goods, etc. I think that would be a big help.
Right.
There's a lot of discussion about potentially monitoring people using their smartphones, monitoring their movements, and trying to anonymize that data. There are a lot of potential benefits and also some risks. Sometimes authoritarianism can be a bit like a ratchet. You know what a ratchet is? It's a thing that tightens in one direction and doesn't really go back the other way. Yeah. And so sometimes if you create opportunities to gather information that as a society we more or less decided we didn't want to be gathered, it can be difficult to put things back the way that they were afterwards. And so if any exceptions are made with regards to data, I would hope and recommend that they have an explicit sunrise clause that basically, or sunset, I should say. So basically, after 1 year, say, the legislation should automatically time out, unless somebody decides to bring that legislation back again, in which case it would have to go through the whole process again. But there are also tremendous benefits potentially, because not just for tracking people, but also making use of health data. I've been liaising with some folks working on using heart rate information from, say, smartwatches to detect a signature, a febrile signature. So basically the early stages of a fever during the prodromal phase. That means basically when you're infected, but you don't necessarily feel ill yet. And that's actually a time when we're often very infectious. And that's another reason to wear a mask, of course, because we don't know whether or not we may actually be able to infect others, even if we maybe feel fine ourselves. But if we could detect a signature in the heart, and there does appear to be a signature there to be found from some research I've looked at, that would be a game changer, because then we could all kind of wear our smartwatches, and that would be another way of keeping us safe, of making sure that we don't go out in the world and infect people.
So how do you think COVID-19 is advancing the adoption of all the disruptive technologies we talked about a few years ago when I spoke to you, when I spoke with you? So how do you think it is going to change the maturity and adoption of technologies such as autonomous drivers and stuff? Vehicles, drivers, that would be weird.
Yeah. It's funny. This crisis seems to be kind of creating killer apps for a lot of these technologies. I mean, if we look at, for example, 3D printing, which people have been talking about additive manufacturing for a long time, and we've seen it being used wonderfully in niche areas, but it hasn't really hit the mainstream, right? It hasn't crossed the chasm from the early adopters into mainstream use. And I think that creating personal protective equipment like face shields and things, that is perhaps a killer app, ironically, for those technologies, and saving people's lives in a distributed manner when supply chains, of course, are so disrupted. And I expect that there's going to be a lot of learning which is taken from those experiences. And that's probably going to change manufacturing in the long term as well.
Change how?
More opportunities to create things locally or for local fab labs, and new distribution networks for technologies. I think we're going to see a lot more open source designs and open source technologies, and a lot more adoption of that. I also think, as you mentioned, autonomous vehicles or autonomous last mile delivery systems are going to be a big deal as well. We're starting to see very successful experiments in using flying drones to deliver very important goods such as test kits. And also, I think this is going to give birth to a whole new industry which hasn't really arrived yet, which is the avatar sector. And that's basically robotic telepresence bots, right? I mean, we're getting used to this idea of, Zooming at home with each other. But there's very little opportunity for us to go out into the world without, donning all kinds of equipment, or else, accepting a lot of risk potentially. But I happen to be a judge of the ANA Avatar X Prize. And that's a $10 million competition to create the best possible robotic avatar system, ideally one that is, affordable for consumers to rent, or for small businesses to rent.
Like a real piece of hardware, actually.
A real piece of hardware, yes, like a robot that you control. So kind of a mashup of robotics and VR and haptics.
Those things are expensive, right?
They should be expensive, yes, but often these things can be sold as a subscription, right? And so that cost is kind of spread over a long period, yes. And so perhaps, just as we have subscription payments for our car insurance, for example, maybe we won't spend that on car insurance so much as avatar service, which might enable us to go into all kinds of avatars, not only our own machine, but rather in a network, kind of like calling an Uber, right? I want to go and meet a friend in Belgium, and I'm in Ireland. Perhaps I could put on a head-mounted display, etc., and and these haptic controls, and then remotely operate a machine which is physically located in a far-off place.
Yes.
And thereby we could have this kind of conversation with more of a face-to-face
experience.
Experience, yes. And And this is so important in a world where, we have wards with tons of people, that are infectious in them, and they need help, and they need people to care for them. And other people have to accept a lot of risk in order to do that. And so I think that this kind of crisis is going to teach us a great deal about telepresence, and that this is going to be one of the next great waves in the 2020s, this kind of new avatar domain.
Yeah, but from what I hear, I've noticed people saying, like, I now finally realize how much physical interaction means to me. So what's the role of the human aspect in all of this?
Yeah, well, the goal of this kind of technology is to create as seamless as possible an experience, a remote experience. So you could literally go into someone's home. You could pour them a drink. You could shake their hand. You could sit next to them, and it's funny how quickly we can kind of adapt to these things. We don't think that we are necessarily sitting next to some weird looking robot thing. We are actually having a conversation with another person just through a medium, whether that's a medium of a screen or an embodied presence. And these technologies are getting already very sophisticated, and it's just a matter of putting them all in one package and getting that released. But I also think that it's going to make a big difference in a world where a lot of people are desperately trying to migrate to other places, because you could kind of telemigrate. Imagine, if you were able to do an honest day's work, but not in a call center, right? But through one of these telepresence systems, and so you could inhabit one of these bots to do some work somewhere else, earning hard currency, good money, and then bringing that home to improve your own community wherever you happen to be, right? And so I think this can be a game changer for people all over the world, and that's going to really it's going to really shake things up, mostly for the better, I think, in the 2020s.
So conclusion, there are actually a lot of opportunities to this crisis.
There are always opportunities. I think, although these are very dark times, I'm cautiously optimistic for the mid to long term, because I think that this crisis is actually bringing us back to our roots. It's obliging us to concentrate on the things that are most important to us. For the first time in history, all of us are united against this common foe, with something that is a very strong interest that we all share, which is our health and the health of our loved ones. And that's bringing us together. And I can already start to see it. It's helping us to perhaps see past some of the polarization and the silliness, the silly meanness that we've had in recent years, in many ways. And I think that's making people a little wiser, perhaps a little more forbearing with each other, and a little more appreciative of all of the hard work that we all do for each other, and that how much we rely on each other. Every day, I'm sitting in my home office and I'm watching the post people, do their thing. And, a year ago, I would have just sort of shrugged. But now I give them a wave and things. I'm like, thank you. I really appreciate what you're doing. And society really hangs on all of us doing our bit, our own contribution. And my hope, my honest, dearest hope, is that this will help us to create a stronger society, a society where we appreciate each other more. Mm-hmm. And that we refocus on reality, that we refocus on things that are important, and less on illusion, right? There are a lot of illusions in the financial world. There are a lot of illusions
Oh yeah.
in politics. But when it comes to the health of a friend or good food in your belly, that's when stuff gets real.
Yeah.
And my hope is that just as in the wake of World War II, we saw the creation of the United Nations, etc., which has had a lot of successes and some failures. And my hope is that this will be like the third time's the charm, that this war is world war against the virus, which is a different kind of World War III than any of us imagined. But here we are.
Right.
And my hope is that the wake of World War III will actually create all kinds of wonderful new distributed institutions that we've never seen on this planet before. And that may lead us towards the stars, but in a sustainable and kind way.
Wow, I think that's, wow, I'm speechless. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you, Nell. Wauw, ja, ik ben weer al optimistischer over deze moeilijke periode en wat die ons mogelijk kan opleveren. Indien jullie het ook zo interessant vonden, geef dan zeker even een thumbs up en subscribe, want volgende week komt er weer een nieuwe gast of gasten. See you soon.